This has definitely been my year for being able to talk about things that have mattered to me throughout my younger years. So before I start gushing about Back to the Future, let's talk details. This was directed by Robert Zemeckis, who co-wrote it with Bob Gale, and it stars, I'm sure as we all know, Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Lea Thompson, Crispin Glover, and Thomas F. Wilson. And this is one of those strange things. When we're born, there's, for most people, around 4 or 5 years where long-term memories aren't really being created. Like, you're learning the skills, but not in the sense of like, oh, I remember this, that, or the other. And that's fine, the brain is developing, it needs to prioritise the skill learning and being able to function over what happened on this specific date. I know there are exceptions, there are people who have perfect autobiographical memory throughout pretty much all their life. I don't know if I'd want that sounds awful in some ways, there's some things that are good to forget. But in that period, things happen, and unless it's on a picture or someone tells you about it, you don't know. And in a similar vein, I forget that I am technically older than Back to the Future. I lived in a world for around 2 years before Back to the Future existed. For stuff like, say, Jurassic Park, which was around 10, I was when that was made, I know that I existed in a world without that, but because I can't remember this period, I can't remember this coming out, I don't really click with that. The sequel a bit more so, like the first one, but then the third one I know I saw in the cinema. So that one I definitely know I existed in a world before, because why would I have been in the cinema for it? But speaking of those, I will be talking about those in the next 2 weeks, by the way. I am doing those. It is going to be like a run of 3. And on the internet, if you're talking about anything and you don't mention the facts that everyone knows, everyone thinks you don't know them. So getting some of the stuff out of the way, I am aware of some of the casting changes between this and the next film. I'll talk about those with the next film. That's, I think, where they belong better. That makes more sense to me. I will mention a couple of things here, but I'm not really going to talk about it in detail. The one thing I will talk about in detail, because it does relate to this film, is Eric Stoltz. He was originally cast because Michael J. Fox was committed to a series that just wouldn't allow him to be released. And there was no ill will when he was recast. It was one of the hardest things that Zemeckis had to do, because he is a good actor. If you look at, for example, his performance in Mask, that is great. He's a great, serious, dramatic actor. Yes, his method acting rubbed people the wrong way. A lot of method actors do that, unfortunately. Not answering to Eric, only to Marty, all that kind of stuff. It does get annoying. I've been in that position. It can be a bit confusing, like I say, frustrating. But the conversation was had of, you are a good actor, but you're in the wrong film. And I think that's the best way to handle it. So after getting another around 4 million, if I recall, of the budget and being able to figure things out, they did get Fox in. They also had to recast the girlfriend, because otherwise she would have towered over him. These days, we stand the short kings, that's fine, but it wasn't so much a thing back then. You know, if men weren't the tall, dominant one, there's something wrong in that relationship. Times have changed, mostly for the better. But, yeah, I know I said I'd talk a lot about the recasting next time, but I have to talk briefly about Crispin Glover. His performance here is... it's fine as young George. He did put a lot of his own mannerisms and peculiarities, I guess, into the character. And because young George is awkward and quite bookish and everything like that, very insular, it kind of makes sense. But he was asked to tone it down in older George, because older people generally calm down with age, for one, and it just didn't fit what they were trying to do with the character. That might have been part of the problems that we'll talk about next week, but like I say, I didn't want to not mention it. And also, his dancing here is still nowhere near the Friday the 13th 4 or final chapter, whichever one you want to call it. It's not that bad, thankfully. So maybe some of the discussions about toning stuff down did help.
Don't think you got it made, no, you're wrong.
But I love that this film sets out what it is right at the start. One of the early scenes shows Marty's band, the Pinheads, performing The Power of Love. Now, one of the judges is Huey Lewis, who tells them it's too loud. So he's judging them for the song that he technically wrote. I mean, you know, like, the character isn't Huey Lewis per se, but it's still... that tells you this is a fun film. We're going to have a laugh. We're not going to take ourselves too seriously. Even though, as a layperson, I think a lot of the time travel stuff does make sense. Absolutely. And I love the fact that it takes a non-other worlds kind of approach. Because there is the many worlds interpretation, where every decision that you make branches out a new timeline. Now, if you think how many billions and billions of people have existed on this planet, that's a lot of branching timelines. It's incalculable for a human mind. But I like that this has more of a If you go back and change something, if you return, you're in this world where those things have changed. So if you go back and say, prevent your parents meeting, you will eventually be removed from existence. Likewise, if you make sure your parents meet, you will continue to exist. And I like that approach. I think it works better because he could have just gone, I'm going to this timeline or this timeline. I think the sequel with the Biff stuff is a bit different, but that's a conversation for next time. But this film really does subtle foreshadowing very well, and the sort of repetition of things. So we see in the 80s, the economic downturn. It's argued that this film could be a critique of Reaganism in that respect, how the only things that are really thriving are adult entertainment venues, from what I can see in the future. Or the present for them, 80, 85, I mean technically the past for us. Time's confusing, but when he goes back to the 50s, it's a lot more hopeful, optimistic, because this was, at the time of it being set, a decade after the Second World War. And people just wanted a world where family mattered, where you could go down the street and, get yourself a drink at the malt shop or whatever. You could just live without this fear of war and death and awful stuff happening all around you. The 50s did have that optimism. There are a lot of problems, and the film does talk about it briefly, but by and large, it was a hopeful era. But we have conversations that are replicated. We have the fact that Biff asks George to do the report in 85 and has pretty much the exact same wording in the conversation about homework in 55. We have Marty effectively repeating Lorraine's own words to her 30 years earlier. She even says, you sound like my mum, and his face, obviously he can't say it, but his face says, well, I actually sound like my mum, which is you. It's very confusing. But that leads me into sort of the themes of the film. I mean, the Reaganism stuff with the 80s being as terrible as it is, that's very clear. But there are elements of determinism and fate in this. We have the fact that Marty has to go back and make sure he gets created. That's deterministic. If he doesn't make sure his parents meet, he doesn't exist. That is deterministic. That is fate. However, he's still able to make an improvement. Because there's a bit later on where Doc Brown says he's never stood up to Biff before. He doesn't say it in that many ways, he just says never. But yeah, he's never stood up to Biff before. And it's that moment of, okay. And he's thinking, so he might be more confident, and obviously we see that in the hopeful 85, the better future. And it's that fact of, yes, these things had to happen in a certain order, but you can still work around that. Again, the sequels pick up some of that as well and do some interesting things with it. But there is also an element of we become our parents to a degree, coupled with an element of our parents were young ones. Marty is shocked going back and seeing that, his mother drinks, smokes, is very forward with him, making him very uncomfortable, which it makes perfect sense. It'd be very uncomfortable to have that relationship with your mother. For most people. I know there are people out there, but let's not talk about that too much. But the idea that then he turns around, like I said earlier, and gives her advice. It is that weird thing of, when you're young, you think your parents were always fuddy-duddies, they're always this terrible, blah, 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 and they're never fun, and you're like, I'm never going to be like that. And hopefully, in certain cases you improve on it, but generally it is the way. You were young, you had fun, and then you settled down, became a functioning member of society, whatever that looks like for you. I'm not saying you have to go into work and all that, classic jobs. Whatever works for you to be happy with who you are and contribute in a way that works with you. But there is this moment with that turn, George's confidence, because he's expecting Marty in the car. But he still goes through with it. He still attacks Biff. And even now, how many times I've seen this film, I can't even tell you. It's been multiples. But I still get that anxiety. Because really, we're talking about an essay scene here. In no uncertain terms. It's done in a very light, 80s friendly kind of way, but it is an essay thing waiting to happen. If George didn't step in, it could have gone very badly. And the fact that, I think it's that really speaks to me, but the fact that George goes, no, I need to stand up for this. This squirrely, weird kid suddenly gets the backbone. And then later on, when someone cuts in at the dance, he does walk off initially, but he goes, no, hold on. I stood up to Biff. I can do this. And it's so wonderful to see. But that then leads me into one of my favourite moments in the entire film. And I think for a lot of people, it is one of the fun moments. Like, we've had this tension, the future's secure, let's just have a moment to breathe before we go, right, now he's got to get back. I love how it's set up this way. And I do have to praise Paul Hanson for teaching the guitar moves, and Brad Jeffries for the kind of Jimi Hendrix, Pete Townsend kind of stage presence stuff. Both of those made it so believable that Michael J. Fox was doing this. Also, we do have to credit Mark Campbell, because the film didn't. When Marty is singing Johnny Be Good, that is not Michael J. Fox. Now, Mark Campbell wasn't credited to make Michael J. Fox look better. Like, oh, look how good he is. But the music producer, like the music supervisor, when he got wind of this, said, you will get a cut of royalties. Do not worry. As compensation. Like, you won't get a credit, but I can do that for you. It's nice to be credited for things, but getting compensated will do. But Back to the Future has been a massive part of my childhood and my adulthood. The fact that even now I sat there watching it, grinning all the way through, enjoying the ride, and I can't wait for the next 2 weeks where I get to talk about the other two. I'm not going to talk about the cartoon series, even though I did watch that as a kid, because I don't want to sit and watch an entire series just to do an overview. So it will just be the three. So a few things I want to end on, and the first one is, partly because I didn't give the praise, I don't think anyway, in They Live, Buck Flower as another homeless drunk person. He was so typecast in this role, something about him just fit. I mean, he was a lovely guy, he wasn't a drunk, homeless person, but something about him just worked in these roles. I know John Carpenter used him extensively in many things in this kind of way. The fact that it's such a small role and I want to give him praise says a lot. So yes, this is my hat tip for Buck Flower. Sort of retroactively for They Live and for this. Also, when the kids come back in the picture, during when he's trying to play, it actually happens in time with the strums, I noticed. My musician brain went, hold on, this is on beat. I love this. It just proves how much care went into this film. And the last thing I'm going to say before we close out is, I probably mentioned it around the time for my uni vlogs and things like that, or my monthly updates. But for Halloween, I went as Marty McFly. For ages, when I got my folding mobility scooter, I was trying to figure out a name. I put it out on Facebook, anyone's got any suggestions. The obligatory Scooter McScooterface came up. I could have gone with it, but it's too many syllables. And then I just realised, hold on, it's the DeLorean. It takes me where I need to go. It's a vehicle. It's the DeLorean. Plus, because this was before Halloween, I was like, I can get the costume. I can actually get the stickers. I still have them on now, the out of time reg plate stickers. And if I'm clever enough in the edit, I will put a picture of me with it up now. Hint, hint, future me. That's how much I love this film. I set myself up, bought a costume that I'm never going to wear again, pretty much, probably, because that's how much I wanted to represent this. I didn't use the barcode one. Maybe for next year, who knows? Go as the whole Doc Brown ensemble with the glasses and everything. Could work. We'll see. But yeah, that is my love of Back to the Future. This is my praise on its 40th anniversary. I mean, technically it's the day before this going live, but I don't do things on Thursdays. So next week, like I say, is Back to the Future Part 2. The week after is Back to the Future Part 3. No idea what after that, but we'll see. So I hope you'll join me for everything coming down the line. And as always, thank you for watching. Take care. Remember where we're going.
We don't need roads.